Hi, I'm Tom Casper, the editor of American Woodworker magazine. I'd like to take you on a short tour of a bench I just designed. We just published this in our magazine, but this particular bench has a couple of more features on it than the one in the pages of the magazine. I'm pretty proud of this bench. It has all the features that you'd want in a master cabinet maker's bench, but it's inexpensive and easy to build. If this is the first bench, the first serious bench that you're going to put in your shop, I think it would be a perfect project. Let's start with the vices, which is, after all, what a bench is all about, an extra set of hands to hold things. I've put a really large face vise on this bench. It's a kind of an unusual type. It doesn't have any metal plates in it. It's just hardware and a front that you make yourself, but it's extremely heavy duty. And because of its size and robustness, it has a great deal of holding power. Let me show you some more about it. First of all, it will open up a long way. It doesn't have a quick action on it. That's a little more expensive feature to add, but you could. Let's stick a board in here. Because of this, it has a large opening over here for putting a board up and down in. Its wide face will really hold a board well in this direction. In fact, the larger the front of a vise is, dimensions, the firmer it will hold something. And you can really crank on this thing, which is really what you want for a stable working platform. And the other thing that this vise has on it, because it doesn't have a metal plate, you don't have to worry about inletting it into the side of the bench in order to have a continuous surface backing up your workpiece. And where that comes into play is when you put a really big board in your vise like this for planing the edge or doing anything else. Now it's supported along its full length. You can even add a clamp over here, and now this thing is good and solid. Anyway, a big solid face vise is important on a bench, and this one has about as good as you can get. At the other end of the bench, I've mounted a standard metal vise, and in this case it's going to act as a tail vise to hold boards between a pair of bench dogs. One that goes in the vise and the other that goes in a series of holes along the front of the bench. Here's how it works. Just open the vise up, place your board up against one dog, tighten the vise up fairly lightly, and now this is secure for planing, routing, sanding, what have you. This design is slightly different than the one I published in the magazine. In that design, I used the dog that comes with the vise as the dog that goes in line with a series of holes that are placed about here. But to tell you the truth, I would rather have my bench dog holes closer to the front of the bench so I don't have to lean over as far on narrow stock. And in order to do that, I built a thick jaw for this vise, drilled a hole in it that just misses the bar of the vise itself, and then drilled these holes in line with that. This tail vise also allows you to place work perpendicular to the front of the bench. So you can work on things going this direction, and sometimes that's awfully handy. I'd like to show you another interesting feature about this bench. It can actually be lowered or raised to two different heights. The higher level, which you're seeing now, is good for routing, sanding, the normal kind of machine type work you would do. A lower level for a bench is preferred for handwork. So for instance, when you're planing something, you're not holding a plane up high like this, but at a more comfortable level. Most benches that adjust in height end up being really wobbly for one reason or another. But this design isn't like that. Let me show you how it works. The feet of this bench are actually in parts, so that when I lift up on the bench like this, you can see there's a separate shoe-like device underneath there. To raise and lower the bench, You just lift up one end as I just did, kick that shoe out of there, you're down on the ground solid. Let me show you again how that works. You lift up, give it a kick, and you're down. And again, for raising it back up, you just lift up, position that with your foot, and you're down solid in it. It won't rock at all. Now, I realize those feet aren't exactly for everybody. First of all, you don't always have to have your bench at 2 levels. And secondly, lifting up the end of the bench like that isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. So let me show you an alternate system. It's not in the original plans. That's why I wanted to show it to you in this video. You may have noticed that I also added this storage unit to the workbench. Again, that's not in the original plans. Without the storage unit in here, the bench is not all that heavy, considering you're only lifting half of it up at a time. But once this is loaded up, oh my, the whole thing gets pretty darn heavy. So I've come up with a mechanical way, a really simple way of lifting the bench up and lowering it down. And here's all you need for that. First, there's a bracket that you screw onto the side of the bench, good and solid. Secondly, you'll need something from the junkyard or the trunk of your car, a simple jack that you put underneath the bracket. And thirdly, just the device for turning this, but as you can see, I've got power. Let's put this to use here and see how it works. Whoop. That's going up. Up we are. Remove the foot. Switch. And we're down. Just do that on both sides and you're all set. One important requirement of a good workbench is that the top be absolutely flat, both in length and across its width. Usually when you make a top out of glued up boards, you're faced with the difficulty of how to flatten the whole thing and how to keep it flat over time. Well, I've kind of skirted around that whole issue by using MDF to make my top. You can't flatten it once it's made, so you have to make it in a way that it's flat to start with. And once you have adequate support underneath the top on all corners, it will stay flat. And let me just show you what you'll end up with. It's a top that is dead flat from end to end and will stay that way. And also flat all the way across. This is just what you need for good workmanship. So let me show you a top that I made for the prototype of this bench and how the pieces of MDF came together. Just wheel it in over here. This top is made from one sheet of MDF cut into a number of smaller pieces. It's composed of 3 layers of MDF, all glued together. Now you're probably asking yourself how in the world I can glue such large pieces of plywood together like this and keep them flat. And I've come up with a pretty ingenious way of doing it. It's a little slow, but it works just fine. First of all, you need a really flat working surface to make the top on. And for that, I just use a door that I bought from the home center. And as to gluing the pieces together, I don't use any clamps at all. What I've done is to drill holes every 6 inches or so, a heck of a lot of them, all over this thing. And then just use screws as clamps. So you spread the glue out over the whole thing, place your next piece on top of the first piece, have a whole mess of screws sitting ready to go, and just fasten them all together like that. Of course, if you have your bit with you. On the next screw, that really helps. Anyway, you just got a lot of screws, one after the other, and then after you're done, the top piece overhangs the bottom piece a little bit. Just take a router, go all the way around the whole thing. You get a perfectly even and smooth surface. One of the most important aspects of a bench is that it be really solid. I mean, when you're planing or routing, filing, whatever it is, you're going to be shaking this bench, or at least trying to shake it. with a lot of force. And obviously the bench has got to remain as rigid as possible. And the downside of a lot of benches is that the bases really aren't up to all those forces. But I've designed a base that is exceptionally rigid and exceptionally strong using a minimum amount of material. But with this bench, I mean, you can shake it as hard as you want on one end, and it doesn't go anywhere at all. And as to supporting weight, well, I mean, jump right on it like this, bounce on it, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't tip over either, even though it's got such a big overhang on it. It's just fine. Well, let me show you why this works so well. And I'll do that by rolling over here. Obviously, these wheels aren't part of the design, it's just for convenience. A base that isn't yet complete. It's really just made out of 1/4-inch plywood and some really simple secondary lumber, whether it's pine or in this case, yellow poplar. Simple frames, glued together, covered with plywood, glued and screwed. And once you do that, you end up with something that's incredibly rigid. But it also means that the center of the whole bench is, as you can see, hollow. Nothing in there at all. And yet, this creates a beam that can remain free of racking in all directions and will never sag. Let me show you a little more about the storage unit that I've added to this workbench. Again, this is not part of the regular plans for the bench, but it's a really great addition to a bench to have storage underneath, that is. And if you build the bench just the simple version, you can add this later, but it's a little mysterious as to how it works. So let me show you. First of all, just to clear this up, these drawers are full extension. They go quite deep. This is a box that goes all the way through the center of this hollow base of the bench. So all of these drawers have plenty of room in them for all your hand tools. Of course, when I finish this, it'll be a heck of a lot better unit. But they do work. So what I'm going to do next is to take this box out of the bench and show you what the structure is like inside the bench. Normally you would just attach this whole box permanently to the front of the bench, but I've left it loose. So let me yank this thing out of here and I'll show you how it works. I need some help for doing this because it's heavy. Roll this cart here, chock the wheels, grab it and just pull. It should come right out. And then I can roll. So now you can see that it's just a plain box, a cabinet. Nothing fancy to it. Simple made drawers any way you want. Let me just roll this box out of the way. And now you can see the magic of this workbench. It's still as strong as ever. But it has a giant hole in the middle. It's now a donut. And to make this, I just cut this rectangular hole in the front of the bench. And you got to remember the original design, this is all hollow inside here. Cut another hole on the other side. I used a template and a router to do that cutting. And then I just added pieces of plywood all around the edges here and tied them into the front pieces. These are pocket screwed in place. This edge is flush here and here. And then I built the box about 1/4 inch smaller in height and width, so it can just slide right through there. There you go. It's as simple as that.